Hey, good evening, everyone. I am Charles Payne, and we've got some significant stories for you today. From Wall Street to Capitol Hill, on the street, by the way, the NASDAQ and S&P soaring to more record highs. I'm going to have more for you on that, more in the show. But on the Hill, the Senate Judiciary Committee just now wrapping up its hearing, and it featured former acting Attorney General Sally Yates, former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper. The witnesses were pressed about a slew of hot-button issues swirling around former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and the alleged Russian election meddling. More on that, but I want to start with this point. What the Obama appointees had to say about the unprecedented flood of leaked classified information.
How did the conversation between the Russian ambassador and Mr. Flynn make it to the Washington Post?
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. Nor do I know the answer to that.
As far as you know, has any classified information relating to Mr. Trump or his associates been declassified and shared with the media?
Not to my knowledge.
Ms. Yates?
Not to my knowledge either.
Okay.
Have you ever given information to a reporter that you didn't want to have your name connected with, but you wanted to see it in the paper?
I have not.
Here to discuss, Nan Hayward, Carl Higbee, and Michael Zeldin. Michael, let me start with you. You've done it all from being a prosecutor, and you've been on every side of this type of hearing. What do you make of it? Obviously, they pressed pretty hard. We know there were leaks, and still this is an area that doesn't seem that we can get resolved.
Well, yes, but Clapper and Yates made quite clear that it wasn't them. We don't know. We will probably never find out. Leak investigations rarely come to fruition. I think in some measure it's worth looking at, but in other measure it's a bit beside the point of what I thought was the heart of their testimony, which was the warning to the White House.
The warning about Michael Flynn?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Nana, what are your thoughts? I mean, I think it was interesting that they, again, drove home the point that there's a difference between unmasking, which happens in the course of a 702 when we're surveilling someone outside of this country, and a U.S. name pops up during the course of that, and leaking that information. I think we were intertwining the two. Nevertheless, it's pretty clear that Michael Flynn, his information was leaked, and that just hit Washington Post.
Absolutely, and look, we all know that Washington is just as secure as a sieve. I mean, someone obviously leaked that information. Director Clapper, unfortunately, has been found to have been less than fully forthcoming in some testimony in the past. So,
we have taken that into account today? I mean, do we always take more so with a grain of salt the things that Clapper has to say now after he himself, has sort of stepped on it a little bit? I
think we have to. And then, whole questions. I mean, the motivation isn't hard to find. A lot of folks probably wanted to embarrass President Trump. It's pretty clear that President Trump comes along so far not having done anything wrong whatsoever, except having been loyal to someone who had supported him through some challenging times and who rightly exited the administration.
And, Carl, that's going to be the mainstream media's take on this, is that President Trump was warned by President Obama that there was more than enough time and more than enough evidence for him to get rid of Flynn sooner rather than later. Of course, today Sean Spicer saying and reminding us that it was the Obama administration that actually gave Michael Flynn a security clearance in the first place.
Correct. But going back to this whole thing, the integrity of entire agencies is on the line here. You want to get this solved, you find out who's in charge of the agency, who was responsible ultimately for if you have to go all the way up to Clapper and to the top, you do that. And then you hold them accountable. You say, you know what, if you don't give us up who did this, you're going down for it. And as soon as they see their own hides on fire, they're going to run for water.
Michael, is it possible to do that?
I don't believe he's ever conducted a leaks investigation. I don't believe it's going to ever be resolved. I just don't see that.
Why? Is that for a lack of political will? Is that for obstructionism? Why won't this be resolved?
It's human nature. It's a lack of prosecutorial capability. It's a lack, perhaps, of political will. But I can't think of almost any leaks investigation that ever has said, here is the leaker. And so, you can spend all your time with it.
So you hold the top of the agency accountable until you find out who rolls on them.
Well, maybe, but it's not going to happen.
All right, let me, Michael, then, The idea that the Obama administration, as they were exiting the White House, would make it easier for a lot more people to have the ability to unmask and therefore leak this information is certainly suspicious, isn't it? I mean, we went from a very narrow range of folks who had this ability to a whole lot of other agencies, and it was something of a free-for-all, or to Nan's point, it became a sieve.
Well, I don't know that it became a sieve or didn't become a sieve. I don't really know, nor does anyone, what the extent to which information was unmasked. I don't think you can impugn intent to leak by the process of unmasking. Unmasking occurs for a host of reasons, many of which and most of which are legitimate. And so I think that there's an objective that may be political here to say that, but I don't think you can factually support that.
Nan, I'm not saying that there's the goal is to leak through unmasking. I'm saying by allowing so many people the ability to unmask increases exponentially the chances of it being leaked.
Charles, no question. It's human nature. It's human behavior. But we know the Senate was sitting on the president's appointees, right? I mean, these agencies have been populated largely by members of the previous administration, placeholders for the folks who are supposed to be here. So, I would lay this in part at the feet of Senate Democrats, who did not act to help the president to get his team on board so that we could have the kind of security that we need.
All right, guys, I want to ask you about this because during her testimony, Ms. Yates claimed that she had raised the alarm with the White House about then National Security Advisor Michael Flynn not being forthcoming in his dealings with Russia. Roll that tape.
And the Russians also knew that General Flynn had misled the vice president and others, because in the media accounts it was clear from the vice president and others that they were repeating what General Flynn had told them. And that this was a problem because not only did we believe that the Russians knew this, but that they likely had proof of this information. And that created a compromise situation, a situation where the National Security Advisor essentially could be blackmailed by the Russians.
Now, here's the problem, Carl. She could never tell us exactly what the underlying conduct was that Flynn committed. That leaves out a whole lot of room for assumptions and the sort of spinning that we've been seeing.
Oh, yeah, and this is largely assumption. Look, I know Michael Flynn to a fairly good degree. He's always been an honorable guy to me. During the campaign, he was responsive. He was extremely loyal, fiercely loyal. And this guy served this nation for 3 decades. So it's going to take a conviction for me to understand in any capacity that he did something
If there
wrong.
were mistakes, though, if he did do something wrong, would you say it was unintentional?
Right. I would say, from what I understand, yes. Like I said, there's still an investigation, which I encourage going forward, but I understand Michael Flynn to be an extremely honorable person.
Dan?
I think President Trump and General Flynn did the right thing in separating him from the administration. I think under the circumstances that was necessary. It doesn't mean that...
I think it's fair.
Right. It doesn't mean that General Flynn intended to do anything wrong. But clearly there were lapses in his judgment along the way, and the president did the right thing. He did the smart thing to separate.
Michael, would it help with respect not only to the public's curiosity, but to the credibility of these of our intelligence agencies, which I would probably guess is at an all-time low, to exactly have more information on what the conduct was that Flynn might have engaged in that made him such a liability, if you will?
Well, we do know, I believe, that Mr. Flynn said he, one, did not have conversation with the Russian ambassador, and two, when he had to admit that they did have conversations, that they were not about sanctions. We know that was not true. And so just in and of itself, that lie, if that's what we want to call it, the misstatement that he didn't engage with the ambassador and that they didn't discuss sanctions, and which I expect NSA wiretaps or CIA wiretaps or FBI wiretaps picked up, is reason enough for us to understand why he was separated. So I'm not sure that we're missing what the lie was, that then there are secondary lies or misstatements or mistakes. I don't mean to impugn General Flynn by any means, but he didn't register as an agent for the government of Turkey. He seemingly did not disclose to the Defense Intelligence Agency who was paying for his speech, and he did not report that on his financial disclosure statements. So those are a lot of things which are substantive, which when Sally Yates says to White House counsel, you got to be careful here, and when the President of the United States, ex-President of the United States, President Obama, warns the incoming President of the United States, President Trump, that this guy is a liability and be careful, I think there's a lot
what are
there
your
that's
thoughts
already
on that?
substantive.
Number one, we don't know the exact content of the conversation, and probably, I hope we never will, between President Obama and President Trump. We don't know exactly what went on, but we know this much in context. We know that President Obama was discovered via a hot mic assuring then President of Russia, Medvedev, that he would have more leeway after the election.
I think the quote was, we'll take care of you, or something like that. Let me ask you real quick, Carl. I want to change it, because another topic that came up was Sally Yates refusing to enforce President Trump's travel moratorium.
Right.
She was defiant. I thought the best line of the whole thing was, who appointed you to the Supreme Court? Senator John Kennedy. Right. In other words, how the hell do you get to interpret and act on your interpretation of the Supreme Court over a ruling from the President of the United States?
Right. Your job is not to interpret. Your job is to enforce as told. All right. If it's illegal, then you go from there. But it was not illegal. I know a judge found it. You know, he didn't want to enforce it. But the fact is here, both of these people on the committee, Clapper and her, have both found in some capacity to be basically bad eggs in some way or shape or form. They've either lied before, misled before, or been fired from their job. That should go a long way in their testimony.
All right, guys, let's leave it there.